You're live.
We're live?
You're live on the internet.
We're live on the internet. All right. We're going to start our misec presentation for tonight. Just a couple of quick announcements that we got going on. One is for Convergent B-Sides, which will be coming up on July 16th, 17th, and 18th. If you want a Converge ticket and you haven't bought one, come see me. I have discount codes I can give out so you can get tickets for like $50. So if you haven't bought it, and if you're not volunteering, if you want to volunteer, also let me know. We still have some open positions, and that'll get you a free ticket. Yeah. So that's coming up next month. Also, right now, we also need more talks for next month. So July is going to be like a speed talk or 15-minute kind of people fly up, give their talks, and just walk off. So it can be any topic that you want to do. Or lightning talks, that's the word I'm trying to think of. So if you have a topic you want to talk about, anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes, let me know and I'll put you on the schedule. Right now I think it's just like me and Matt Johnson, maybe some other people. So please jump on in. And of course for this month we still have the misec social, which will be the last Tuesday of this month at Nightlight. So with no other things to think of that I can think of at the moment, Matt France and Network Security Fundamentals.
Hi, welcome. So the tone of this talk, this is my thoughts on the subject. It's an opinion. Hopefully it's going to prove to be a good point of discussion, something that sparks an interest. To a lot of you, it's going to seem pretty obvious. It's not necessarily targeted at super technical people, but it's still decent things to think about. And some of it's going to be controversial, but not so much. I think management might have more of an opinion on it, but we're light on management tonight, so that's good. This isn't any fact. There's like no facts in here. Any stats, anything is all pretty much made up for example. It's not a framework. It's not a guide. Not a how-to. It's not really going to get you anywhere other than provoking some thought, hopefully. So, my background. I graduated from MSU with a Bachelor's of Science in Engineering, Computer Science and Engineering. I have several certifications. They're all boring. I enjoy things that are fast, fun, or in general hot. If it gets hot to touch, it's probably something fun worth playing with. Jeeps, cars, and trucks. I enjoy snowboarding a lot and other types of board sports and winter things. And I'm an avid fan of computer hardware. Kind of a nerd from the start and played with basically everything I had, trying to overclock it and break it. And as a hobby, I do GPU-based password cracking just to kind of push the limits and see what's reasonable from a computation standpoint, which ties in well with being a gamer. I enjoy lots of PC games, not so much console, unless it's a racing sim. Love a good racing sim on console. I played WoW way too much back in the day, and these are actually the two non-made-up stats in the whole presentation. We were awesome on our server. Ended up finishing... Anyway, it's not really too important. Total nerds. And pretty heavy into PvP. Top 5 percentile in inter battle group, so awesome. Actually, that's wrong. I guess it'd be 95 percentile in the battle group. Played lots of Counter-Strike Source back in the day, other first-person shooters like Unreal Tournament, and Heroes of New Earth is my latest passion. There's others. Clearly, I meant to add others. There's a comma, but kind of forgot about that one because it's not so important. And tabletop games, card games, deck building games, yes, D&D. It's all fun stuff. So, I try and think of this a couple different ways, but logically, being a network guy, it makes sense to break this down into a client and server type approach. Naturally, you treat servers different than clients, and clients different than other clients necessarily, or depending on how and where they work. Context is very important, which kind of ties back into our rule number 1: is know your network, know where you're coming from and what you're doing. So, in general, I like to think of clients in the office as completely different than clients who are remote for a couple different reasons. And we'll get into that soon. From the server standpoint, it's kind of the same old story. Network segmentation plays a big role here. First of all, from its clients, because you don't necessarily want to open a server up to the world, Network 101, and from its peers, because pivoting is also important. In general, the way I look at technologies that accomplish security functions, I find it best to look at it from a value standpoint. Usually the good ones are expensive and they're hard to manage, but they're effective, hopefully. I think it's key to your sanity, to your management's budget, and to your success. I kind of have different tiers of value that I look at, things that are very hard to implement, but also effective. These are the best of the best of the best. Think Men in Black, the top 95, I'm sorry. I consider that maybe the top 95 percentile of mature and proper security-oriented organizations reach these or look to use these. I think defense contractors, tech companies, government agencies. In general, like I said, I think they're difficult to maintain and implement and design, but usually very effective. Moving down, we got the Epic tier. It's great, but not the best. They're not the Men in Black, but they are the Marines and the Navy SEALs. They're special. Again, I threw 70 percentile out because I think it's the top 30% of the companies out there might reach for these technologies, or they might finish and implement them correctly. They're usually also very expensive, but usually easier to maintain, or at least conceptually easier to design when you implement them. And then you have basically everything else that's worth mentioning. It's listed as rare, but they're not actually that rare. I think most organizations pull this off in some form or another. Usually I group IPS and other technologies into there that I'll get into in a minute. This is your local police department, and I think 50 percentile is generous. I don't think many companies do things really well, but most people try and do this to some form or some degree or another. Even your coffee company based out of Lansing probably has a web app firewall or IPS or some form of technology that would fit into this category. And beneath that, I have the gray garbage because I don't think they're really worth mentioning. So, approaching the client, like I said, I think it's great to break it down into a workplace, in the workplace versus remote, because you would treat them differently. From a workplace standpoint, there's a few technologies that jump out as just high value, easy to implement, and they will break a few things, but they're useful. Dynamic ARP inspection and DHCP snooping, I listed them as two separate things. They kind of go hand in hand, though. The fact that dynamic ARP inspection won't work without DHCP snooping is kind of key to that point. If you're not familiar with how they work, dynamic ARP inspection basically sits there and lets things only answer an ARP request for the IP address that was given through DHCP. So this cuts out a lot of your layer 2 man-in-the-middle vectors. It also means that the switch is watching for those DHCP requests, and things with a static IP address, no go, it breaks. For your client networks, though, in general, in a building like this, and maybe a company like this, it's usually pretty useful. And then this is the heavy hitter. It's listed as, colored as legendary, and I think it's fitting because it's extremely difficult to implement correctly. I consider NAC to be one of those things that when it's done well, it keeps the strangers out for the most part. You can defeat it. There are ways to basically just sit there, listen, and clone your MAC address, and now you look like that user. Depends on the implementation, though. Sometimes it's port specific. But in general, it's a great way to make sure that people on the network are people that you know about. There's lots of pitfalls, though. In general, those come down to things that don't handle user authentication, printers, IP phones, IP cameras, and the list goes on. Think of all the non-standard things that clients don't log into. Basically, if it doesn't talk 802.1x, it doesn't go. It doesn't work. Like I said, that makes it very difficult to implement correctly, but I think there's still a lot of value there. And in general, if you're watching for MAC addresses that you know that Dell's going to use a certain first 3 bytes, you can exclude that for Dell printers or HP printers or pick your technology. Again, though, high value, I think it's very difficult but very useful. Looking at the client from a remote side, and there's a couple of different things we can look at. I listed Windows Firewall. I doubt anyone here has actually configured a Windows Firewall or considers it a serious thing. I generally don't either, and it's especially a moot point if always on VPN is in place. But there's some, at least with Windows 7 and up, maybe Vista even, but I didn't try it. There's nice little features that basically change your policy based on the domain that you're on, if you are on a domain or on a public network. There's certain things that you could do that really secure your work laptop or your admin should be doing. If you're at home on a coffee network, choose your public network. There's no real good reason to have like SMB listening in general. I mean, you're pretty much just there to browse the internet. So disabling things like that when you're floating to a public network really kind of, sometimes help, put it that way. To completely beat that though, or completely best it, I consider always on VPN to be much more useful. Again, it's kind of a high value thing, but it's not necessarily easy. It's difficult to implement correctly, but also gives you high reward, I think. There are some negatives as a user connects, or if they do get owned in some way or another, or if the laptop gets stolen while it's connected or logged into. It's always on. As long as it has power or network, it's going to be on your network. So that is kind of one of the downsides, but if you can keep track of that and hopefully your lost asset notification program is working and people tell you when their stuff is stolen, then hopefully you negate that risk. It's pretty straightforward. There are a few gotchas, captive portals, hotel networks, stuff like that. It tends to be a problem when they try and log in and they can't get out. Some things do goofy things and it could break it, but I think the risk is worth it. Full disk encryption is another one that I think is kind of huge. We tend to overlook it because, quite frankly, I'm going to say we tend to overlook it, but I think users do. Some businesses do too, but in particular as tech people, I think we understand the value there and the fact that if something is stolen, all you have to do is image the drive and you get it. There are some poor forms of encryption that do non-preboot authentication. There's a few products that come to mind, but basically it has the private key sitting as part of the boot sequence. So you can actually boot up and get to a Windows logon screen without ever actually typing in a password. That's kind of a big problem for things like, for tools like Conboot. It could just shim in as it boots up and now you're on, and the encryption is kind of pointless at that point. But you still can't pull the drive out and image it. So there is some value there, but I don't know. I tend to think that pre-boot is the only way to go if you're talking something that actually has valuable data. Also, the general category, it kind of applies to remote and local. Antivirus is on here just because everyone thinks of it, and I tend to think it's garbage, especially if you have application whitelisting to any degree. Application whitelisting is listed down here as an orange item, a legendary item. It's not going to be something that you just do. It's very difficult to nail down the types of executables that your clients will be using. There's certain things you can do to kind of speed that up or take shortcuts. Approving them based on certificates that they're signed with. It covers probably, random stat, but probably 60%, 70% of what you're doing. Things signed by Microsoft, Adobe, pick your top 20 tech companies. It's probably going to cover a lot of that. A lot of application whitelisting tools have that functionality built in too, and then manage the certs that are approved and basically what ones have high trust.
What are some ways you get around whitelisting?
Oh, there's lots of little ways. Scripts are one great way, just because you can't necessarily whitelist or blacklist a particular script. I'm thinking non-traditional scripting. Well, think of your traditional scripting languages, and kind of programming languages, Python for one. You're not going to whitelist or blacklist the interpreter explicitly, and some users may have applications that rely on that. Some scripting languages like PowerShell, they do support signing of scripts. Yeah. Quite frankly, there's not a lot of technologies out there that are completely rock solid. Yeah, there's definitely ways of getting around it. Kind of a nice little shortcut too, and this is also a really easy way to get around it, is whitelisting specific folders or applications. System 32 comes to mind. If you get something that drops in there, you kind of, and that's what your policy is, then you're host. But I list this in the case of servers also. I think from a client, it's tough to do this correctly. Application whitelisting, again, huge value if you do it correctly, but most companies probably won't get there. A lot of people tend to implement technologies like this and NAC in alert mode, where they'll get the policy in, but they'll never get to the point where they're actually denying applications from executing, or dropping clients onto a dark network. That tends to be pretty disruptive to people, so not everyone gets there. A lot of these things some of the things carry over. I have application whitelisting listed down at the bottom, but it still has a very key place in the server area. I think it's a lot easier, maybe not a lot easier, a bit easier than working on a workstation. On a server, you have a very well-defined list of things that should be executing. In general, you'll never have Java. Well, depends on the server. You'll never have a PDF reader, I will say that. You're not going to have a lot of common tools that users have. So you can narrow down that list of executables that you approve by quite a bit. Of course, there's still pitfalls. Don't actually necessarily know why I listed it as blue, because I think segmentation is kind of a much more valuable thing that I have to put down here. It's tough. There's lots of upkeep. Trying to split the networks that the servers go on and build policy on those is a very time-consuming thing. But you can optimize. The biggest thing that I've seen personally is grouping servers based on the function they perform. So you may have web servers. That's a pretty good, pretty easy example. Have a general network where web servers sit. If one gets compromised, they'll pivot to another web server, or could possibly pivot to another web server. But the potential's there that you'll limit the attack vector after they leave, or if they try and leave that network. So it'll have access to, say, other SQL servers if it's a typical tier 3, 3-tier application. But in general, web servers are all going to have about the same rule base, give or take, and then you can apply common policy on them from an IPS standpoint, which is the next bullet. It's pretty key to be able to sit down and tune these to get the right signatures for the right servers. In the web server case, if you have a web server network that has mixed IIS and Apache networks, or Apache servers, obviously IIS specific vulnerabilities don't apply to Apache servers, so you want to do a bit of tuning in there to kind of make the policy work for you. You can't just slap it in place and go. Again, I have it as blue because I think most places do this, but they don't do it well. It's never actually tuned to the point where it's going to be effective.
Never tuned where it's automatically blocking?
I've seen it, which is good to say. Internally, I think it's debatable whether you want to do that internally, because you do have a certain amount of trust for inter-company networks or at the perimeter from the internet. Absolutely. Most IPS companies, if they're halfway decent, they're going to have policy built out to the point where, or the other signatures built out to the point where they are pretty effective. If you do have a false positive, hopefully you're alerting on that, or you're alerting on things that are blocked, and you can go in and change the policy if you need to, which is coming up. Thanks. Also, I mentioned that hopefully this is a point of discussion. If you guys have any questions, feel free to speak up anytime. There's no limitation here. So there's tons of options. Picking what you want to implement first in basically a priority order is pretty tough. It's very specific and contextual. It depends on your environment, and honestly, there's no like I said, this is no roadmap. It's just a bunch of information and thoughts. It depends on your company, your environment, and what you've already put in place. Management culture is also a big factor in what you do and don't do, and a lot of the blocking policies. For example, you might have pick a high-level officer that likes to go watch porn at home. Totally hypothetical. Always on VPN will ruin that for him. And that might actually be at a small enough company a legitimate reason not to use a feature because you've been told not to by someone who pays you. So it's a bit of a bummer, but it really depends on the place you work for and the people working there. So if you happen to be in a place where you're starting a new company or you get hired into a new startup and you have a completely clean slate, I think there's a lot of high value things that you can do first before you start tackling like application whitelisting, at least globally. Before and kind of the order that I would do it would be dynamic ARP inspection, DHCP snooping. Of course, they go hand in hand to protect your clients while they're on the network. Always on VPN to keep them always on the network because, there's really no good reason for a user other than a network technician to be outside of the company network. And then server-side application whitelisting as a kind of generic policy that you're whitelisting the things that you want to run. Hopefully it's a web server. It's pretty easy to narrow that down. Should be. A fun little example for that one, where it would be useful, is a content management system. I want to say probably 2 or 3 years ago, the Electron content management system that I hear some companies use had a vulnerability where basically you could have anonymous uploads, and there was a possibility there of uploading executable files, a PHP web shell. If it's in the /uploaded images folder, there's probably no good reason for it to execute ever. Uploaded images, uploaded docs, stuff like that. So you can really pick and choose in the folders, and if you need to, hopefully whitelist the ones that you know are good, or blacklist the ones that never should have executables in them. So anyway, fun little use case. So this is all great. I think technology is great, and a lot of these are technologies that will prevent things. They don't always prevent things, though. So where do you go after that? I like to take the same approach and look at it from a value standpoint. I think there's some items that are pretty easy. They're easy to use, implement, and lots of devices support them. NetFlow being one of them. At least from a network standpoint. I'm sure there's other host technologies that can be used, but I'm not too keen on those details. So strictly from a network standpoint, I really think NetFlow is your go-to item for if you happen to find a client that has a compromised machine. Look back at your NetFlow data and look for basically your outliers. Hopefully, not a lot of people fit into this category, but I tend to think of it as a bell curve. Your top 5% and low 5% talkers and connections tend to be the interesting ones. So if you do have a compromised client, run a search on their IP address, maybe for 14 days, and if you find anything, that might be worth looking at. Maybe a large upload to choose your site. Useful. It's not extremely useful though, because you do miss a lot of application level detail. You don't get URLs, you don't get IPS signatures, of course, and you don't get full packet capture. But moving down, most devices support logging of some sort. It's very rare that a device won't support logging of connections made to it. Some web servers fit into this category, and some load balancers also fit in the category of not logging by default. But in general, if you can configure it, you can configure it to log also. I would say log everything, at least everything important, all network traffic, and then some server-side things like DHCP, DNS, web servers fit into that, of course, and then some system logs like domain controllers. I don't necessarily know if anyone cares if you're getting authentication logs to every server. It would be very useful if you have unlimited storage, but if you're going to pick and choose domain controllers. And from a network standpoint, there's lots of useful stuff. Hopefully your firewall or proxy, hopefully you have one, and I didn't even list it down here because I think it's assumed, but URL filtering of some sort is very, very useful for trying to keep the people going to the sites they should. So hopefully your firewall or proxy has the capability to log those URLs. And also if you're running one of the next gen firewalls, which they're all next gen at this point, but if they're aware of usernames or applications, also those provide a lot of value. And of course VPN authentication, your IPS, and pick your technology. Basically anything that if it's on the network, it's going to be useful. I think some of the forensic technology is a luxury, and it's great to have, but not essential. Full packet capture definitely fits into that category. I don't think anyone would ever be able to say that that's their go-to technology for any forensic investigation. It definitely is at some point in the investigation, but it's not the first thing you look at. If none of you have tried, open a 4 gig PCAP. It will not happen. It ends up chewing up about 30 gig of RAM just trying to open in Wireshark. And especially if you have any decent internet pipe, you're not going to be able to capture everything. So use it when you can, but don't feel bad if you can't, because quite frankly, nobody can store that much unless you're throwing big money at it. But from a forensic standpoint, I don't think it's all about technology. Documentation is kind of key here. The original design is very useful to have. Not everyone documents this well when things go in, especially in the first month or two after a project closes. Sometimes things happen and change, and it just doesn't get documented. And also document the incident. There's also a lot of value in employees, solution engineers, the ones who set up the original design. They tend to know the solution the best. They'll know the weak spots. They'll know where. Well, they'll happen to know that this web server talks to a SQL server and maybe just a few other random servers for some dumb reason because it has to pull an XML file. It's happened. And oftentimes those details of the solution are never documented. It all comes down to the engineer knowing how it was set up. They tend to cover the gaps just because of that. And of course, having the right people in the right place in your forensic teams really helps. You can throw a network guy at forensics in general, and it would work, I think, for the most part, until you get into anything host-based. I would not touch, I'd try, but I wouldn't be very successful if I tried digging through Windows Registry to find out what happened to a particular machine when a USB drive was plugged in. That's, of course, not my forte. So pick and choose, put your employees where they fit. And that's kind of all I have. Steve.
So you talked about a lot of technology like proxy servers and URL, but nothing about SSL decryption. So with everything going to SSL, how do you actually be able to inspect everything that's secure?
When I was eating dinner, I thought about that and just forgot to put it in. So again, that's a pretty controversial topic depending on the company you work for. Some companies, I think utility companies, financial, government, of course, lots of names up there. They'll support that initiative to put SSL decryption in place. Higher ed would never fly. So it really depends. But yeah, if you have a pretty security-minded company, I think it's pretty much essential. All you really have to do is throw up a generic cert, and lots of proxy servers and application firewalls will take a look at the CN on the cert as it gets passed on to the user. And then they'll do a lookup into their URL database based off that CN. So that's useful to a degree, right? But it doesn't catch everything. A good example would be stuff hosted on upload sites. Maybe upload isn't exactly a thing anymore, but pretend it was, or just whatever. Any random storage place, SourceForge even. If you can't get visibility into the full URI, you're going to lose your value, especially when you start talking about things like SQL injection against your own servers, or pretty much everything using SSL, it locks you out if you don't have some form of SSL decryption. So yeah, pretty much essential if you care. Not every place cares.
I know said you're not a big fan of traditional AV, but what are your thoughts on anti-malware that does use sticks?
I think there's a lot to be said for that. It sounds promising. I haven't personally done any research on it, but yeah, if you're talking about things like, okay, this is not a sales pitch, but the one I'm most familiar with is Palo Alto Networks has traps, as they call it. It looks for generic exploits like buffer overflow, and basically, as soon as something in memory gets changed that shouldn't have been changed, a pointer to a return address, it'll trigger, which covers a lot of your generic AV signatures. There's so much overlap between that and application whitelisting, or with that and application whitelisting combined. There's a lot of overlap with AV, and I think you could really cut out the traditional signature-based AV, which just gets heavy-handed and, quite frankly, not very effective. If it's pure signature-based and it's just looking for a hash for an executable, it's pretty trivial to beat, and I don't think the value's there. So yeah, I think heuristic-based technologies, along with application whitelisting, tend to basically defeat the whole point of AV.
So I'll just comment on that. So here's the problem in the security industry is why I personally think AV has a place. Standards such as PCI dictate that you have to continue to use technologies such as that because they aren't changing with time. So it's better to catch 20% going good than nothing. But until the industry itself can make a change and say that, you know, this is really no good. It forces companies, unfortunately, that deal with certain types of credit cards or HIPAA or other kinds of things. They're required to run those technologies, even if they're
So that's a good point. I didn't throw anything in here about compliance. Some of those technologies specifically fit as a requirement in a compliance scenario. Again, I kind of agree with you. It probably should be looked at. I don't know how it's written exactly. I've heard rumor that it's written basically to the degree that it has to be a signature-based anti-virus technology. Application whitelisting kind of fits in there. At least most application whitelisting tools have a blacklisting feature based on signatures, which sounds a lot like EV to me. You could probably, you'd have to argue with your auditor, but you might be able to make that fit. Any other questions? Fun thoughts? Oh man, it's quiet. All right. Well, hopefully, thanks, Kate. The whole point of this was to kind of take a high-level approach. It certainly wasn't anything super technical, just food for thought. I have a few ideas for other presentations, and hopefully, if you guys are interested, it'll be the next one. We'll talk about that topic. Yeah.
So it sounds like you're going to be doing a lightning talk in July.
Yeah.
15 minutes.
Stealing porn videos from porn sites.
In 15 minutes.
Oh yeah, no, dude, it's really easy. It'll take 4 minutes. I swear. In fact, I could probably tell you the whole talk now. They're Java players. Okay, we're not gonna give it away.
Do what you want. Your time.
Their applications, their Flash applications that come down. They hit a web server with a ping URL and basically just say, "I'm an active player. Give me this video." And then as a side channel, it gets the video from a different server. As long as you have an active player open, you can download whatever you want. But as long as, if you don't have a ping, go and do it, which is really just a HTTP GET request. You can't get the video. So technology is pretty easily defeated if you look at the Google Chrome cache and load up a proxy like Burp.
That was less than 4 minutes.
Oh no, in 15 minutes I'd actually show you how to get it. Yeah.
There'd be a demo.
So the newer ones, HTML5 is easier than that.
Really?
They're embedded, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh, they're embedded.
Yeah. It's a media object. You just download MP4 and you're good to go.
There are one sites that use HTML5.
Guys, this got more discussion than my actual talk. This is awesome.
Back in my day, we had to install Flash.
You mean role player?
Yeah.
So look for that in July, and hopefully after that, sometime in detail talk about password cracking, both NTLM and I think WPA2 is a fun one just because it's so computationally expensive.
We'd be
So-
showing how URL SSL decryption actually works behind the scenes.
We could also do that, but that sounds so fun because there's no
It's super fun.
it's
just
pretty dry,
works,
man.
right?
It's all certs.
Yeah. You just turn it on and it works, right? It doesn't break anything.
No,
Not as exciting
no.
as WPA2.
WebEx.
A fun note on SSL decryption, since we brought it up, and thanks for the question, Steve. Things like PFS totally screw that idea that you can get in the middle of a session. It's going to completely change how we actually go about decrypting that traffic, and quite frankly, we probably won't once we get to that point.
Sure.
Yeah, cert opinion also messes with it. Things like Dropbox, Google's apps, WebEx is one of them too. If they don't get the CN back that they're looking for, and if they don't get it issued by the issuer they're expecting, it breaks. That's just too bad because we can't get in the middle of that, but hey, that's what we have to work with. So, that's all I have, guys. Thanks for coming.
Okay, so
Otherwise, if anyone has any lightning talks for July, let me know. If you want to volunteer for Converge B-Sides, also let me know. Otherwise, take up the time, chit-chat, do what you want. Eventually, we're going to move over to Nightlight, so welcome to us there. Otherwise, thanks for coming.
For those of us that don't